First of all, can I start by asking you, as one of the most senior women politicians in the United Kingdom, about your reaction to the scenes in Clapham Common last night?
Well, first of all, I think we all need to, and I've been listening to Gloria and to Jess speaking about this issue, obviously, and I think we all need to remember that there's a family grieving the death of a young woman, and that should never be taken away from, because sometimes things become quite political and everybody's talking about it and they're using this young woman's name. But we always need to keep that in the back of our mind. I think there's two issues. First of all, there's the operational issues, which undoubtedly the Commissioner will have to speak to the Home Secretary about to find out what actually went wrong last evening. But then there's the policy issues, and it's the policy issues that are quite conflicting, Gloria, and I think you will understand this because we have put in quite draconian legislation to try and prevent the loss of life due to COVID. But that has a huge impact then on the civil liberties of people in terms of how they protest, how they raise their voice. And as we come to the end, hopefully, God willing, of these restrictions, that is a real and tangible problem for those of us who are in political life. And we need to discuss that, and we need to really get, I mean, as Tom said earlier on, these COVID restrictions go through Parliament, they go through Stormont. We nod them through because we believe they are needed to save lives in terms of COVID. But really, they are taking away an awful lot of our civil liberties as well.
Okay. I want to talk to you about the situation with women in Northern Ireland. People talk about this as a watershed moment. Domestic violence was at a record high in Northern Ireland in the latest figures. Now, Women's Aid launched a petition last week calling on the Northern Ireland Assembly to develop and implement a violence against women and girls strategy. They say Northern Ireland is the only part of the UK that does not have a specific strategy dedicated to tackling gender-based violence. Why not?
Well, first of all, say that I listen very carefully to what Women's Aid have said around that. I work with Women's Aid at a constituency level, as you would expect me to do, but also at a Northern Ireland-wide level as well. We have just passed our new domestic violence legislation, which is very important because before then we didn't have coercive control on the statute book, and I think it was really important to get that there. And I think what we need to do now is absolutely to work with Women's Aid to try and come about and have the proper strategy in place for Northern Ireland. We have very much seen a rise in domestic violence during COVID, again, because for some people, the home is not a safe place. And therefore, there is a need for us to reflect on that. We have been trying to work through that, put in place interventions that will help people if they are stuck in a home which is not a safe place. But look, I'm more than happy to work, as I'm sure all of my colleagues. Half of the executive in Northern Ireland, as you probably know, Gloria, is female. And we will want to make sure that we send out a very strong message about keeping women safe.
And last week I noted that you said that online abuse turns women away from public life. What do we do about that? What sort of abuse are you subject to?
Well, I think I probably get the most abuse in Northern Ireland, and that's not something I'm particularly proud of because of my politics, because I'm a woman in politics. And I get abuse about my appearance, I get abuse about my politics, but I do get death threats on a quite regular basis, and I have to deal with that. And as I said last week, the thing that worries me most is that this will put off young women coming forward and getting involved in politics, which of course is a life of service and which is hugely rewarding, as you know, but has its challenges. And I think the biggest obstacle to attracting women into public life at present is the way in which social media allows the anonymity of people to be protected, and therefore there is no recourse for women who are abused.
Very clear. Now, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson visited Northern Ireland on Friday. How would you describe the reception he got?
Well, I think it was right for him to come to Northern Ireland. Clearly, he's been visiting Scotland and Wales in connection with the vaccination programme, and it was right that he should come to Northern Ireland as well, because we're very proud of our vaccination programme here as part of the UK programme. It was important that he came to acknowledge that. And also it gave me and my colleagues the opportunity to discuss the ongoing problems with the Northern Ireland Protocol. So we did have a good discussion around that. He was very much in listening mode, but we were able to point out the very real and tangible problems that there are with the protocol.
And I'm sure you would have made the point that the protocol needs to be scrapped. Did he give you any indication as to whether that's a possibility?
Well, certainly in terms of his response after meeting with us, he did make the point that there needs to be consent from both sides of the community here in Northern Ireland to anything that happens in Northern Ireland. That's a long-standing part of the Belfast Agreement, that you need consent of nationalism and unionism to make things work here. And certainly there is not one unionist politician in Northern Ireland that agrees with the protocol, because of the way in which it has such an impact on life here in Northern Ireland. And actually, not just unionists don't receive things from Great Britain, of course, nationalists don't receive them either.
Brandon Lewis, the Northern Ireland Secretary, he gave an interview to the newsletter yesterday.
Yeah.
And he said, with a bit of goodwill, we want to work. We want to do this with the EU, and we want to find a way that works. With a bit of goodwill, we can work through that. He said, I'm cautiously optimistic we'll get to a mutually agreeable solution. Would you use the words cautiously optimistic that an agreement can be reached within the existing protocol to make it work better?
Well, I fundamentally don't think that the existing protocol is going to allow us to do that, because it's the architecture of the protocol that causes all of the problems. Just when you think you've dealt with one problem arising from the protocol, something else pops up, and that's the very nature of the protocol. So, of course, we want to engage with the European Commission. Of course, we want to find a mutual way forward. That would be the best way forward. But unfortunately, I haven't seen much willingness from the European Commission side to engage in that sort of discussion. What we hear from Maros Sefcovic, who's the Vice President of the Commission, and indeed from other colleagues, political colleagues across the EU, is the way to deal with the protocol is more protocol. And that's simply not going to work because of the disruption that's occurring to Northern Ireland at present.
And so when Brandon Lewis talks about a mutually agreeable solution, can you think of what that might look like?
Well, there are other alternatives to the protocol. Those have been around for quite some time, Gloria, whether it's alternative arrangements, whether it's having smart borders. And of course, that was raised from the European Commission side itself. They did their own work on the smart borders piece and then decided not to proceed with it. And of course, it could be as simple as mutual enforcement in relation to the different regulations that apply. And of course, at the moment, we all have the same regulations because we've just left the EU. But in the future, there could be a mutual enforcement regime to deal with these issues.
And the grace period, which exempts British firms on post-Brexit customs checks for supermarkets and parcel couriers, that's been extended unilaterally until October. Is that kicking the can down the road, or do you believe the British government is intent on using that period to change the nature of the protocol?
Well, of course, businesses welcomed it, because without the extension of the grace period, we would have been in a very difficult position at the end of March. Essentially, it would have meant that every lasagna that came across from Great Britain into Northern Ireland would have had to have been checked, despite the fact that there's no risk of it going into the single European market, because, of course, it's marked up in sterling and the Republic of Ireland is in the Eurozone. But so the grace periods, I think businesses have welcomed that, but they welcome it as a sticking plaster, because what they need, of course, and what we need is a permanent solution to all of these problems that are currently ongoing. And so we have that space now to find that permanent solution, and I hope we can use it to find it.
Jacob Rees-Mogg pointed out that you can, of course, undo the Northern Ireland Protocol if you wait till 2024 and have a majority at Stormont. What did you make of those comments?
What I make of those comments is that obviously Jacob doesn't realise the damage that is ongoing at present in terms of goods coming across from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. But the fundamental with this, Gloria, is that our supply chains, our UK supply chains, it's the UK internal market. Most of our goods come from Great Britain. We sell most of our goods to Great Britain. And what we have is a situation which is actually meant for third countries. So, for example, if China was selling goods into Europe or whatever. So we have a complete disproportionate reaction to the risk to the single European market. And first of all, we can't wait to 2024. And secondly, of course, the government changed the consent process in December of last year. Normally, we have dual consent, as I've said, consent of unionism, consent of nationalism. And the government changed that to a straightforward majority consent piece last year, which of course we would argue is out with the Belfast Agreement.
Yes, and let's talk about the Belfast Agreement or Good Friday Agreement. Of course, that was a big moment in Northern Ireland's history. Loyalist paramilitaries have withdrawn their support for the Belfast Agreement. As you know, the Loyalist Communities Council wrote a letter to the Boris Johnson and Ireland's Taoiseach, warning of permanent destruction of the 1998 peace agreement without changes. It said it undermines the basis on which the combined Loyalist military command agreed their 1994 ceasefire. How do you interpret those words?
Well, first of all, I interpret them as saying that they have lost confidence in the Belfast Agreement, which is very concerning. Loyalist paramilitaries at that time and the people that supported them did sign up to the Belfast Agreement because they felt it was the way forward in terms of unionism and nationalism working together. I do welcome the fact that in their letter to the Prime Minister, they say that opposition to the protocol should be peaceful and democratic. I think that is absolutely the right thing to say. And I'm encouraging everybody who is very, very frustrated at the moment with the protocol to make sure that everything that they do is peaceful and democratic. And as the leader of Northern Ireland and the leader of unionism, it's very important that people hear me say that. It has to be constitutional, it has to be political, and it has to be peaceful.
What do you say to your critics who say by talking to them you are legitimising paramilitaries?
Well, what I would say to those critics is that I'm in government with Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin is the political arm, as we all know, of the IRA. The IRA were involved in violence and criminality for a very, very long time. They then went down the route of and I'm not going to do a history lesson here, Gloria, but the Hume Adams talks, which was with the SDLP, trying to bring an end to violence. And what I am trying to say to the Loyalist Communities Council and to those who are constituent members of it, the way to go forward is to go on the political route, to take legal action, to raise your voice and your concerns about the protocol and about Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom. So I feel very keenly that I need to do that. I certainly condemn criminality. I condemn violence of any sort. Unlike Sinn Féin, I've always done that, and I will continue to do that.
Is it time for a legal challenge to the protocol?
Well, there are a number of legal challenges, as I understand it, to the protocol. At least 3, I think, that I'm aware of have been taken. So we will await to see the outcome of those. But I would much prefer if the Prime Minister recognised that he has a duty to the people of Northern Ireland to protect the internal market of the United Kingdom. Whilst, of course, the European Union will want to protect the single market of the EU, I understand that. He has a duty to protect the single market of the United Kingdom.
What if your attempts to scrap the protocol fail? What other options do you have? You could bring down the devolved government. You could refuse to enact the checks at ports. Do you consider those options?
Well, let's look at the first one. If the Stormont Assembly was not in place and we were just being ruled from London, do I think that that would be a way to get rid of the protocol? No, I don't, actually, because it's important that the people of Northern Ireland have an assembly so that these concerns can be raised and that we can deal with the difficulties in the Northern Ireland Assembly and the executive. So it is important that we continue to say to the Prime Minister he does have a duty. He always talked about the fact that we were going to have unfettered access from Great Britain into Northern Ireland and vice versa before the withdrawal agreement was enacted. We warned him at the time that there was going to be huge difficulties, and unfortunately those have come to pass.
Why do you think he ignored you?
Because I think he wanted to get Brexit done, Gloria, and I think he thought that it was just going to be checks similar to what always occurred in relation to SPS checks, you know, the phytosanitary checks that take place when animals move from Great Britain into Northern Ireland. But as we warned him at the time, this was going to impact on every aspect of life in Northern Ireland. And we've seen that, whether that's pot plants coming across from Great Britain into Northern Ireland or parcels from some companies who have stopped sending parcels to Northern Ireland. Famously, John Lewis have stopped sending parcels to Northern Ireland, even though we're supposed to be in a grace period and that's supposed to not be happening at present.
And not being able to buy things from your own country is clearly a problem. You could refuse to enact the checks.
Well, as you know, our agriculture minister is looking at all of these issues at present. He is taking advice, legal advice, and speaking to his own officials as to what needs to be done. Because you see, at the moment, we're in a grace period, but the chief vet in Northern Ireland has been very clear that once the grace period ends, the number of agri-food checks needed in Northern Ireland will come close to the number currently processed in the European Union as a whole. Now, how is that proportionate, Gloria? How is that realistic when you think of the risk to the single European market? There isn't a risk in the way that these checks have been implemented. So there does need to be an acknowledgement that this is not realistic and that it needs to be dealt with.
Arlene, good morning. It's Tom Newton down here.
Hi, Tom.
Just to pick you up on your answer to Gloria there, do you hold the option of simply refusing, as the Northern Ireland government, which is your preserve, to impose those agri-food checks when those grace periods come to an end? I mean, you could take the view, quite arguably, that it's in breach of a legal document that well predates the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is, of course, the Good Friday Agreement. Is that something you're actively considering?
Well, what we're saying to the Prime Minister is that the number of checks that will be required at the end of the grace period is far out with what I think he understood and what many others understood when they were voting for the withdrawal agreement. So therefore, there needs to be action taken by not just the Northern Ireland Assembly, but by the UK government, of course. And it's the UK government who are in charge, if you like, of these the relationships with the European Union. Of course, it's not a devolved matter. So therefore, they need to take action because it's completely disproportionate to what is necessary.
Let me just ask you a third time, just to make sure we're clear on this. You've had two opportunities to rule out acting unilaterally in the Northern Ireland government to refuse to impose those checks. You're simply not doing that. You may well refuse to impose those checks yourselves.
Well, what I'm saying to you, Tom, is the relationship between Europe and the United Kingdom government is just that relationship. What we do in the Northern Ireland Assembly is our relationship with the United Kingdom government. What's happening at the moment is that the checks are happening between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and that needs to be stopped and it needs to be dealt with. That's why I'm always saying to the Prime Minister that we need the replacement of the protocol and a much more sensible way to deal with the risk to the single European market. Because I think what people forget is this was the UK government putting in place a system to protect the European single market. But actually what has happened is that there's damage happening to the Belfast Agreement, which we all know, and its successor agreements, the St Andrews Agreement, is fundamental to the power sharing arrangement here in Northern Ireland. And it's also damaging the UK internal market. So by putting in place a system to protect the EU single market, what we're actually doing is damaging our own country.
OK, I think that's been heard loud and clear, or your non-denial has been heard very loud and clear, certainly over this side of the United Kingdom. Anyway, let me just ask you this finally, Arlene. Do you think the Prime Minister's game plan here is just to try and kick this can all the way down the road to 2024 and the Northern Ireland Assembly vote on the protocol? Because it's very clear he doesn't like the protocol. He doesn't think it works, in that it certainly doesn't offer unfettered access to goods into Northern Ireland because, of course, of all those checks we've just been talking about. Yet at the same time, he's refusing to tear it all up. A lot of pressure from yourself and some of his own backbenchers to do that. So when politicians can't decide what to do, you kick the can, don't you?
Well, you don't, because you're going to have to face up to it at some point. And I mean, we in Northern Ireland know that probably better than anywhere else in the United Kingdom. So he can't kick the can down the road to 2024. That's just not realistic. And as I've said, the impact and the damage to part of his own country, if he does that, would be really, really large. And I think he needs to take action, and he needs to take action quickly.